This is Susan Popoola, host of the Leading the Mosaic World podcast, with a special series on being a man in today's world. As of late, I found myself increasingly conversing with men and focusing my work on boys and men. Boys and young men trying to find their place in the world, emerging leaders in the workspace, established leaders navigating increasingly complex environments, and successful men missing a sense of real fulfillment. It all points to the question of what it means to be a man in today's world. A question fundamental to men, for gender harmony, and for a Mosaic world in which everyone is valued for who they are and what they have to offer to the world around them. Join me as I explore this subject with a rich diversity of men, and women too. Thank you. This is a special series of the Leading in the Mosaic World podcast on being a man in today's world. My guest today is Dennis Murray. Dennis is an Assistant Chief Constable with Thames Valley Police and has more than 3 decades of policing experience, having begun his career as a Special Constable in 1991 before becoming a regular police officer in 1992. Throughout his career, he has held a wide range of operational and leadership roles, including work within the National Crime Squad, serving as a hate crimes officer, and leading major policing operations and public events. His experience spans community engagement, organisational transformation, public order policing, and the development of trust and confidence between policing and the communities it serves. Dennis has been recognised for his commitment to improving legitimacy, diversity, and community confidence in policing. In 2021, he was awarded the Queen's Police Medal for his exemplary service and his contribution to improving diversity within policing and developing new approaches to scrutiny and accountability. As Assistant Chief Constable, he's led on legitimacy and public values for Thames Valley Police and is the National Police Chiefs Council lead for identification and trust and confidence. His career has been shaped by a commitment to public service, leadership, and building trust across diverse communities. Dennis, I truly feel honoured. As I read that, I truly feel honoured to have you here with me today. Thank you very much for being my guest.
You're welcome. Glad to be here, Susan.
Can I start off by asking you, where were you born and raised?
Yeah, so I was born in Northamptonshire. I was born in a town called Corby, and that was very much a steal. I was one of 3 minority families that lived in the town at that time, back in 1970 when I was born. And, I lived there for a long time until I joined the police. But then when I joined the police, I had to move away from there because too many people knew me, car damaged on one occasion and things like that. So I'm still within the county of Northamptonshire, but I work at Thames Valley and my family is still very much in Northamptonshire.
Yeah. I've visited Corby, and as you said, an old industrial town. And I just wonder, what was it like for you as a young boy living and growing up in Northampton, specifically Corby?
Yeah, I mean, it was a great place to grow up in. Don't get me wrong. Whilst it was challenging, it was a great place to grow up. There was lots of community spirit, lots of poverty and poor areas of the town in terms of that, because the steelworks did close down sort of in the 80s, but I quite enjoyed my time there, and actually in some respects it probably helped me when I came into policing because I was brought up around by English people. Whilst I had my cultural differences, and when I was in the house there were cultural differences, I kind of grew up with a white English mindset, which made life a lot easier when I came into policing. And some of the people that I see struggling in policing, people that have come in and haven't had alternative background. They're very much from their minority background and not really had much of that English way of living. So I think that was a help, but also a hindrance because you stood out. My brother, and regularly I've talked about this on YouTube and various things. My brother was bit more shy and retiring than me. He was held down, jumped on, and beaten up to the point where at 7 he had a nervous breakdown and was found right under the stairs, because to a 7-year-old, that kind of made sense that, I've got problems because of the colour of my skin, I'll paint myself white. And at that time in history, policing never had such big crime or, community tensions and things. And their view was, this is just school ground bullying. So my parents didn't trust police that much, really, in terms of that. And then my dad died when I was 13. So, I was a free school meals child. Really understand what education was about, because my dad was the one that used to drive that. School with no real qualifications, really. So, from the age of 13, I've had various jobs as well as school, and turned into a bit of a survivalist. But, I look back at those times around, hanging out in the woods and playing down at the river and all of the things that we say are dangerous now, and think back to those some great times, and some times where actually getting out and about as kids and going out the door first thing in the morning and coming back later in the evening, you would kind of hold your head in your hands now. But they were great days in my life. I've got fond memories of them. And for some reason, the world always seemed shinier and deeper when you think back to days. I'm sure it wasn't quite like that. But we had some tough times. But tough times in a tough neighborhood also meant some really close-knit relationships with people. And back then, we were just coming out of the owl days, and people started to recognize difference and diversity, and actually bringing us back to the days now where we'll be seeing some of the things being said that was said then. So it's quite an interesting way in which the world is being shifting and moving back to. So I'll pause there, and you can come back with any clarification questions if you want.
Yeah, I mean, there was so much there, rich things to unpack. First and foremost, I'm sorry to hear what your brother went through. And I just wonder, how is he today? I mean, because you could say, well, that's 50 years ago, but how is he today?
I mean, now he's a happily married man. He's got children. My father got him into boxing. And actually all of us, most of my brothers, my dad used to be a boxer, got him into boxing, kind of, not to go and seek revenge or anything, just to be able to have a bit of confidence about himself. And, he managed to work through that and move forward. From that perspective, but what that kind of instilled in me was, my parents at that point had a low trust in policing. That kind of resonated through my family. So when I said to my mother, I'm going to join the police, her view was, well, if you join the police, I'll disown you. And I said, well, look, I'm going to join anyway, because the way you can change things is from the inside. If you're on the outside, you've got no chance of changing things. And here we are 34 years later. I'm one of the senior ranking minority officers in the country. I'm, one of the senior leaders in charge of the 5th largest police force in the UK. My brother now works for Community Payback. He used to work for policing. My sister-in-law works for policing. My nieces work for policing. And actually, for that family that had that distrust, that's come full circle. And now actually we are all very much public servants in terms of it. So you have to step into the arena to be able to change things. And I've been able to make some significant decisions. In relation to Milton Keynes, I led all the work on knife crime, where we saw some significant deaths of young black boys in the community. And now here we are 3.5 years later, no murders in that particular community. We've got a really developed community plan, huge links with the minority communities. And Milton Keynes is not because of just that, but thriving location, been declared city status. These are the sorts of decisions you can make. When I first came here, there was some debate over whether bringing the knife angel to Milton Keynes was a good thing or not, bringing it regardless.
Yeah, I'll come back to that if you don't mind, because I like to go on a journey.
Sure.
And I'm just thinking back to your mum, who had that distrust in the police. Did she eventually come around? If so, what made her?
She absolutely did. But you got to think back to her experience in those days. I remember her coming home and asking me, what does Aswad mean? Now, Aswad is a Caribbean pop group.
I know, it's one of my favourites. Yeah. Sadly, the lead, he passed away a couple of years back.
People were shouting that at her on the bus. She didn't know what it meant. So from that sort of thing, she had quite a negative experience in terms of those sorts of things. So, coming to the UK, basically they were quite well-to-do, if that's the right word, in India, but they were Anglo-Indians. I'm Anglo-Indian. So when India had home rule, they had to leave India because they would have gone from what was probably, if I use it as a phrase, but higher up in the pecking order of the caste system to much lower because India had home rule. So they chose to come here for the benefit of their children and move to the UK. So they came here with a suitcase and nothing else. In those days, you didn't have self-sufficiency. You weren't allowed to come. So they lived with my uncle for a number of years whilst my dad was securing employment. And then he secured employment in Corby in Northamptonshire at the steelworks. On the back of that was allocated a council house. And that was the start of the journey.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking back to your time as a child, and there was the negativity around racism, and you spoke about how that affected your brother especially, but you also spoke about the positive, the sense of community, going out to play freely, unlike now where there's less so. And you've mentioned about the challenge that we have across the country with knife crime. And so it leads me to think about the differences in experience of boys when you were growing up and boys today. What would you see as the key differences? As I said, no, you could go out and play freely, but what else would you say has changed about being a boy between now and then?
So I think that in terms of now and then, that everything is far more, don't get me wrong, I accept that I might have rose-coloured glasses on, and that it was just as full of risks then as it might be now. The difference is now the world is very much more connected. Everything is front and centre. So all of those cases that are dangerous, horrific, not very nice, are shared widely. So people would have a much more jaded view. But where I used to walk about and hang around the streets and walk about, and all, nowadays a lot of that would be seen as antisocial behaviour. In terms of it, I wouldn't let my children just wander around like I did in those days. But it felt like different times then, and actually, that was the norm of what it is. Social media and what we see in TV and the news, on the internet, all of those things, I think, drive children to believe that they've got to act or behave in a certain way. We're very much in a throwaway culture society now, where everybody wants, or I say everybody, but a lot of people want things today. Historically, before you would scrimp and save for or whatever, now you don't have to do that. So I think it's raised expectations of people, and therefore people want to get on it. And you see that manifesting in different ways. You see it manifesting in people working really hard to become successful. You see it manifesting in people that want to commit crime as a quick route to get rich quick. And unfortunately, at the end of that is victims.
Yeah.
People that are being targeted. For me, it was a driving force for me to go on and do well.
Yeah, and I'm then thinking specifically about boys and young men trying to navigate the environment around them. As you said, there are differences from what it was previously in terms of the nature of the environment, things more connected, you're more aware of what's going on with other people. But I don't know, from your perspective, what would your message be to a young boy or young man trying to navigate in terms of trying to be able to make the most of life?
I think the first thing is that your past doesn't have to determine your future. I left school, as I said, with no qualifications. My dad died when I was 13. I turned into a bit of a survivalist, but actually, and I spent probably 4 or 5 years kind of going from job to job. But what drove me on was that you sit there and go, if I want out of this, it's going to take hard work and determination. And if you want an extraordinary life, the Q is in the term extra. You're going to have to do something. And in terms of that, there are opportunities for people if they want to take them. I think the bit that I think that nationally we could do better is making people aware of the opportunities that are out there for them. We combine a number of challenges, makes things much, much worse. So if you add neurodiversity to a single parent family like I was in the end, poverty and underprivilege and all of those things, those adverse childhood experiences decisions, especially for young boys as well, is likely to lead them into some really challenging times, criminality and things like that. You can step outside of it. On the council estate that I lived on, a lot of people that I knew as a child ended up dying of, drugs overdoses and being involved in criminality. I was lucky that I was able to get out. And I say get out in terms of my family still live around there, but I was able to get into policing as a special, join policing and work my way up, master's degree. And, I see lots of people who are really successful that come from very similar backgrounds.
I'm just curious with that. What is it that you did? What was the mindset and what was it that you did that enabled you to achieve the things that you did? Because I'm thinking of that young person who thinks, well, yeah, it's easy for you to say, but then it's the how that really makes the difference. And that is what, should I say, enables people to think, yes, I can. And that might even apply to people, even if they're from more affluent backgrounds. But what was the mindset and what are the key skills, capabilities, things that enabled you to go on to achieve the things that you've achieved?
So I think that part of the adverse challenges that I had as a young person gave me a huge sense and ability in terms of resilience, bouncing back from knockbacks, bouncing back from those challenges that you have along the way. So that when things came along that were challenging, that you were able to just regroup and move forward. Not having a lot as a child meant that every step I took was a step up. So you're absolutely right in terms of for those people that are affluent, for example. My son went from a middle class child who basically had a really good lifestyle into the Royal Navy, where he was sleeping on a bunk in a room with a load of other people, totally alien to him. But he made that choice at 16 years old. I want to go and join the Royal Navy. He's got neurodiverse issues, and the Royal Navy was the best thing that could have happened to him. He's just got himself promoted. He's managed to, travel the world, save some money, and all of those things. But it comes from that individual making that conscious decision. I want more than this. And then seeking out the support and guidance and help to get it. The support and guidance is out there more than it ever has been. My support and guidance was I knew a local police officer who helped me applying for the police. When I joined the police, my written skills were not particularly great. And my tutor was the best person that could ever be because he was an extra teacher. And I leaned in on that. I purposely made the decision to do more report writing, to go into the jobs where I was weaker at those skills to make sure that they became one of my strengths. If you look at my eldest son, one of the, I never knew this until I spoke to a fire officer, neurodiverse children are at high risk of drowning, apparently, because some of them are fascinated with water. He was fascinated with water, but we turned out strength. He's a gold level lifeguard. He's an open water scuba diver. He now works for the submarine division of the Royal Navy. So he's still fascinated with water, but we've turned a weakness into a strength. And that's the bit that I think people can do. It's finding out what are your superpowers. Some of the best police officers that I've ever managed are people from underprivileged backgrounds and people who have come with neurodiverse conditions, but they have a different way of thinking. Likewise, I've had people come from privileged backgrounds that are fantastic because they're well read and had the opportunity to see a bit of life. I think there's opportunities for everyone. And sometimes people see their life as a fait accompli in terms of this is all that there is for me. There really isn't. They can step outside of that and move on to the life that they want to have. Just have to make that conscious choice and then find the people to help them and be resilient.
Yeah. So what I've got from that is first and foremost, it's like make a decision. So it's the choices that you make. So if you don't like it, make a decision that you want something different, then find the support that you need in order to be able to step forward and to engage with what you want. There is something key that you mentioned, I believe in as well, and that's something about celebrating every step. It reminds me of the dinner ladies when I was at school, when I didn't want to finish my dinner and they'd say, well, eat that bit and leave that bit. And then I'd eat it and think, yeah, I've just achieved it. And then it's like, it's the next bit. And then I'd eat that. Before I knew it, I'd finished my dinner. And I've learned from that how to divide things up and like one step at a time, and celebrate each step. So the choices, the support, this acknowledging and celebrating each step. And then the development side that you mentioned, whereby you know your superpowers, the things that you're naturally good at, you build those things, but also exercising the weaker muscles and working through those things until you're good at them as well.
I think one other thing that's really important is you can either use what's happened in the past to drag you down or to fuel you. So one of my strongest memories was up until the age of 12. I had hand-me-down clothes. I remember having the school tie that was the old school tie because we couldn't afford the new school tie. Nowadays, the school would find you a tie, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't be the kid that stands out. And on my 13th birthday, my mum asked me, what do I want for my birthday? And I said, I want a new school uniform. And I got a new school uniform as a birthday present. And my mum, it was Thursday, and my mum said, are you going to wear it on Monday? And I was like, oh no, I'm wearing this tomorrow. And actually, because I just wanted to, that was an achievement for me. And actually, I use all of those memories as fuel now to say, when you feel tired, how can this drive you on? I remember somebody telling me on my journey that they didn't think I was strategic enough, and they sent me a message. Now, I could take that and go, oh, that's terrible. I kept that. And every time I felt disheartened, I would look at that message and go, I'm going to prove to you how strategic. And push on and push on. And I think that was one of the things, if I could advise anyone, turn your negative experiences into fuel that drives you forward.
And I'm going to run with that for a minute in terms of feedback, because when I talk to boys, young men, and have just finished a survey piece talking to about what their experience is, I hear a lot about pressure that for boys and young men and older men as well, that there's a lot of pressure. They're conflicting and confusing messages, but there's also a lot of pressure. And I'm thinking about feedback and how we balance that, not because you took that feedback and I guess you didn't allow it to wear you down. I think that there's probably something about learning what to accept and what not to. And I don't know from your experience, because I suspect you would have had a lot of pressure personally, especially as with the police officer of colour who stood out and you've gone up the ranks. But how do you, is it true that there's a lot of pressure these days for boys and men? If so, how do you manage it? How do you personally, and what would you recommend for boys and men generally?
And for boys, it's quite difficult because how do you take what I'm about to say and take that into a language that a young person's going to understand? But I think one of the things that became really apparent to me, I like to follow some podcasts, and there's a chap called Jim Rowan, and he talks about standing guard at the door of your mind.
I like that.
Making sure that you let in the stuff that does value to you and not letting in the rubbish. And actually, one of the voices that you will hear that is constantly negative is your own. So your own inner critic, your own, self-esteem, that imposter that will come out in all of us. I have imposter syndrome. I'm not afraid to say it. What I've learned to do is understand my imposter and know which bits to listen to, because actually my imposter is the bit that also switches me on. I'll get into work in the morning for 7 o'clock. I'll be well read and prepared, done all of my emails, ready for my meetings at 9. But at 9 o'clock, I am ready and on the ball. That's my imposter that drives. Where you've got to be careful is that your imposter doesn't drive it to where you're doing perverse behaviours, like working 20 hours a day and being handed work. And the other thing I learned along the way is take on the work that adds value to you as well as your journey, because actually you can also be overloaded with things and you're taking on stuff that doesn't value, and all you do is break yourself because you get overloaded and burnt out. But in terms of it, listening to the people and finding those people that can help you on your journey. There were plenty of people that came before. I stand on the shoulder of giants in terms of a number of minority officers and staff that came before me, that actually I was able to learn from their mistakes and their journeys so that I didn't make the same ones. And I think there are plenty of people out there. If the fact that we're doing this kind of podcast now is to hopefully give people those tips and advice on how they can avoid the pitfalls and the journeys and the benefits that I had when I went on my journey. So I think if you don't ask, you don't get, and you need to be willing to ask people for help. It's amazing. When I was going for my superintendent's board, someone told me of a chief constable in Nottinghamshire, white English guy, and said he will help you. I rang him and said, "Look, I'm going for my promotion board. Will you help me?" He drove all the way down from Nottingham, met me in a pub, gave me a load of coaching, and the next day I went and I passed my board. And then he said to me, "All I want you to pay it forward."
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting when you say that, especially when you talk about police officers from minority backgrounds. And if I think about the starting point of the environment you grew up in, where, I mean, even with your parents, there wasn't a trust for the police. How do we, because we're both people of colour, how do we know who we can trust?
I'm not sure that you will ever know who you can trust, if I'm being honest. I think that you will find those trusted advocates out there, and you will find other people who, you will never know. I know people who I wouldn't have said that they had a particular view about race or colour or a political party, and they have left and joined political parties that might have views that far more to the right than the left. And you look at that and go, well, what did that mean when they were in policing? It might not mean anything, because you second guess and try and fill the gaps with this. But there are those certain individuals that you can pull out and go, I know 100% that they put their money where their mouth is. When they say that they'll do something, they will help. And the rest of it is people that you have to work around and work with. Even some of the people that I thought didn't like me very much, I used that by sending a 360-degree feedback form to them and having a conversation with them saying, I don't think you like me very much. I'd be really interested to know why, because that might give me something to understand whether I'm doing something wrong or whether that's just how it is. And some of those people would say, I don't have any view about you at all. And it was my perception. And some of those people I now go for coffee with and meet up with and all the rest of it. So this is what I mean about standing guard at the door of your mind. Some of this can be perception. Some of it's reality. The difficulty is working out which of those is which and who are the people. What I would say is in 34 years service, I could probably name 20 people where I've gone, they were in my corner 100%. And the other people were people I worked with, who I got on with, who I went out with on a night out or whatever. But they weren't those people that made a difference to my life. But I certainly know the people who did. And they're the people to seek out.
And so for any, and I'm going to say young man, trying to navigate this world, the space, whether it's within police, whether it's you bumping in, having a challenge and having to speak to a police officer or any other adult, or just even in terms of personal relationships, there's something about having a space whereby the people that you meet people along the way and you take time to get to know them and develop relationships. You might not have them held close to your bosom as your best friends or best associates, but giving everyone that the benefit of the doubt, unless there's something crystal clear that says otherwise. And then in time, as you navigate and engage with different people, then you will get to a place where you work out those people that you can really and truly trust and that have your corner.
Yeah, absolutely that. But I suppose the first step, you talked about your space. The first step is stepping into it and owning it. Not everything is about success. I've had a successful career, but throughout my career, I've had lots of failures. And actually, there is nothing wrong with failing your way to success.
I was about to say, how do you actually define success? Because a lot of the time it seems to be about having things and having positions, but how would you actually define success?
Well, I suppose success is about your own personal ambition. I was happy as a police constable for 17 years. I didn't seek promotion. The bit that attracted me to the promotion pathway was that it offered the chance to do a degree without any cost to me as part of the process. So that was one of the bits. Less than that, again, when I talk about your mindset, if you come from a certain background, when I went into the room, I applied for what was called the high potential scheme, and it came with a master's degree opportunity. And I remember when they talked in the room with all of the candidates saying, some of you in here are going to be chief officers. I didn't see that as me. I just thought this is going to get me a, superintendent. It's not going to be me as a chief officer. That was my own self-limiting belief in terms of that, and then when you get through that process, you start to build up in your confidence. I remember as a superintendent, because then you were earning a bit more money, going into a restaurant and thinking, quite a fancy restaurant, and think, I feel out of place. I feel like everyone in here is richer than me and more intelligent than me. I probably earn more than most people in the room. But that mindset comes with you if you let it outside of it and reinvent yourself to whatever you want to be. And whether that is a post that you get into and you go, I love this. But one of my best friends was a PC, joined together. He was still a PC when he retired last week, but he's had a fabulous time. So everybody's journey is different. I decided that I'm going to go for a promotion after 17 years. 6 years later, I was a superintendent. 10 years later, I was an assistant chief constable. So we've all got that potential. Part of it is around what's driving us and whether we're willing to step into that space.
There is, as I said, success is different for different people. So I guess there's key as to what really brings you as an individual fulfillment. You might not always know, because as you said, sometimes it's like stepping out. So I'll talk about pathways, and it's like stepping up and stepping out. And as you go along the path, opportunities might open up, and you actually find more about what you're good at and what you want to do along the way.
So let me give you a really good example. So when I first became an ACC, I said to the chief, the deputy chief constable's positions come up. It's a bit early for me, but would you support me? And he said, yes, I will. Now I negotiated in my head in advance, what's the wins for me? So the wins were I could put an application in and they absolutely rip it to shreds and say it's terrible, and I get feedback. That's a win. I put it in and it gets told, right, that's going through to the next stage. That was a win. I go for the interview, I crash and burn, I get feedback. That was a win. I pass the process, but they promote somebody else because they had more evidence. That was a win because I'm told I'm capable of being a DCC. Or I get the job. I didn't get the job, but I got told I was passable, and then they offered me a role, and it's the role I'm in now, which 50% of the responsibilities are Deputy Chief Constable responsibilities, getting me ready for the next one. Now, I could have said, well, look, I know the guy that got the job, and he'd been a temporary Chief Constable, he'd been a Deputy Chief Constable, I'm not going to apply. If I didn't apply, I wouldn't have got any of those benefits. You've got to step into the arena and actually fail your way to success. That failure of not getting the job meant that I've got a different job than I've got now with more responsibilities. I'm capable of passing a process as a deputy constable, but I wouldn't have known that. But I'd just gone, he's got more experience than me, I'm not going to apply. So you have to put space, push yourself out of your comfort zone and be willing to fail your way to success.
And there's something big with failure, something big with pressure. If I think about statistics, a key set of statistics that come to the fore of my mind is the statistics around male suicide, the unacceptable high number of men that sadly die by suicide. And when you look close to that, people talk about mental health, you talk about guiding your mind, and there's that whole thing about the pressures and failure and the sense of what you need to achieve. And I don't know whether you have any views on that, because you seem to have been laying out something which is very balanced, which has the potential to help manage people's expectations of self.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of this, it's finding those checks and balances that are right for you. So I'm particularly grounded around family. That's one of the things that drives me. I work long hours. Sometimes I'm away from home, but every 6 or 7 weeks, I will take some time where I just concentrate on family, recharge myself, make sure they're connected and move forward. I've got go-to people that are what I call my 5 a.m. If I'm in trouble at 5 in the morning, who am I going to pick the phone up to? And I know they'll answer and I know they'll come and help me. And I haven't got very many, probably 2, but I know who they are and they know that they can rely on me in terms of that. I've got people that I can go to and say, tell me who is speaking, Dennis Murray or Dennis Murray's imposter. So when I was thinking I'm not going to apply for the DEP's job, I phoned a friend of mine and said, tell me who's speaking. And he said, you need to go away and write an application. And having those checks and balances of people, when I didn't get a particular job, I remember moaning to my brother and saying, I didn't get the chief superintendent's job. I'm really upset. And he said, hang on a minute. You were the free school meals kid who lived on a council estate, and now you're in charge of half of the force in Northamptonshire. Life isn't that bad. And it gets you back down to ground again and starts to refocus you. But if people are isolated and they don't build that sort of structure around them, whether that be friends, family, someone they work with, a college teacher, whatever, then all they're left with is isolation. And it's the isolation that lets things into your head, because there's no one to reconnect and tell you, hang on a minute, you're thinking disproportionately. And then you look at the medical side of it. If you're suffering from stress, depression, whatever it is, there's a chemical imbalance that doesn't allow you to think positively. So you go into that spiral. So from that point of view, how do you then get out of that? Well, you get out of that by having that network around you as best as you can. And don't get me wrong, as you get older, you'll find that network gets less and less for some reason. But having them around you to be able to snap you out of it, to keep you focused. And the other thing I would say to people is, if I asked you to tell me what you're going to do on a holiday or build an extension, you would have a plan. And you'd probably write that plan down. The amount of people that don't just write down their thoughts on where do I want to go? How do I want to get there? What are my options? They can go back and look at that when they're under pressure and under stress is amazing. People don't write it down. Have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and think all of those things through so that if plan A doesn't work out, you're not broken. You go, I thought about this. I'm ready for this. I've got a plan B. Thought about this. I'm ready for that not working. I've got a plan C. Some people don't. And actually along the way, some of the things that I thought were right for me as plan A didn't work out, and plan C turned out better than plan A ever would. But you don't see it till you get there.
Yeah, no, there's so much in that. It's interesting when you were talking about the loneliness. It reminded me of an old Seal song. Seal used to be one of my all-time favorite artists, and it's like there's a line. It's the loneliness. You got me. And so it is very real, because I always used to say about my godson, he has a very close relationship with his mum. And when he went to university, he would speak to his mum on a daily basis. And so I always, when I then spoke to people about young people who have been in care, who don't always have that person they can talk to, I always explain to people that actually having someone to talk to means that big things become small, but not having someone to talk to, small things can become big and insurmountable. So that is very much in what you are talking about.
Yeah.
That whole thing about being isolated and loneliness, the loneliness is the killer. One thing I often hear about when it comes to men is I hear people saying men don't talk. And then some people say, actually, they do. It's just, do we really listen? But I'm just wondering, what do we need to know about men? What do we need to be aware of about men that we don't typically talk about? I hear us talking about a lot of things that are negative, but I think there are just positive things and, should I say, just other things that we don't talk about when it comes to men that we need to talk about and understand more.
So I think there's a couple of things, and these are opposites to each other. So there are important things around men where some people will see, or some men will see expressing their emotions or expressing their feelings as a negative thing. And actually, I don't think that has to be the case. In terms of leadership, for example, I like to think that I lead with compassion. I'll say what I feel. I chaired a misconduct meeting where the person who was up for the misconduct was found not guilty, and I went up and gave him a bit of a hug afterwards, and they told me that meant so much to them. That might feel really awkward to somebody else who's not used to being brought up in that environment, or might not have been brought up in an environment where, their parents or their family were particularly tactile or huggy or shared their emotions in a certain way. So I think there's that one difficulty. But I've also seen issues at the other end of the spectrum where you've got people who want to talk to everyone and anyone and tell them about their injustices. And I think I was probably one of them for a while. And actually, some people use that as fuel against you. So you've got to find that balance. Certainly, in my career in policing, I got to the stage where I found if it wasn't adding value to me or it was a necessity, I wouldn't share something with everybody. I would share it with those need-to-know people. But in terms of younger people who don't feel like they can go and talk to people, I think it's really important that there is help out there. There is support out there. There are people that want to be positive role models. I take one of my sons to swimming every Sunday, and whilst I'm sitting waiting for him, I run a coaching surgery for people that want to progress. Now, it adds no benefit to me from an organisational point of view, but it rings in my ears what that person said to me when they said, pay it forward. And there are plenty of people that want to pay it forward, but it takes people to step forward and say something. Lives are busy, and sometimes people don't pick up on the emotional cues of what's going on around them, and it can be missed. So if people need help, that phrase of, if you don't ask, you don't get, is absolutely right. You have to be able to get to the position where, I no longer go into a meeting and say, I'm here to see if you will support me or not, because that leaves rise to an answer of, no, I don't support you. I will go in and talk about, I'm here seeking your support. And that little shift in phraseology, it was a game changer in some respect, because people like the path of least resistance. So as a young person, having the confidence to step up and say, I'll take part in that, I'll be the person that does that, or I need some help, is going to be absolutely key. And if you're a person who feels different, whether it be because of gender, because of colour, because of a neurodiverse issue, or whatever it is, that becomes, in my opinion, 10 times harder. And actually, if you want to step forward into this arena of whatever you choose and make it, you've got to be willing to step forward. It's the first step to success.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I find myself going back to your early days. It's great that you're out there mentoring and supporting people. And I'm just thinking of your childhood. The first half, you had your father around, and then the second half, sadly, from the age of 13, sadly, he wasn't around, you lost him. People talk about the importance of fathers in the boys, in life of boys. And I guess you can talk about that from experience, how important it is or not, and where fathers aren't around, what we can do to bridge that gap, if it is important.
No, I think it's absolutely important. And actually, if you look at it, that might be considered by some to be, not having a fatherly male role model figure in your life would be an adverse child experience in itself. Up until the age of 12 years old, I was a grade 8 student, never had less than 99% in any exam I ever took, because my dad was behind me, pushing me. He used to advise me. Some of my fondest memories were walking in the woods with him, where he'd tell me which bird was which and all of that sort of thing. And he encouraged me to take up hobbies. Some people might think it's strange. I kept pigeons as a hobby, and my dad was into that. What it did was it kept me out of some of the crimes that some of my friends were getting drawn into, kept me in the garden, staying out of the way. But when my dad died, my dad used to read my homework and go, that is really brilliant. You've got all of this right. And then he would rip the pages out and go, but the handwriting's scruffy. You're better than that. Do it again. When he went, I had no one driving. So, my mum was not very well. She wasn't particularly educated in terms of, education. So I didn't focus on my education after that. And then when I left school, left with either really bad grades or, not for age you'd want, and you look back at now, but it didn't mean that the capability wasn't there. Maths is a strong set of mine, but I haven't got a maths. But I manage a £650 million budget and make savings for the force of 20 million. And now I've got the job of saving another 15 million for the next 3 years. That's a kid that left school with no maths qualifications. So it doesn't have to define you.
And there are two things for me with that. One is, it's not to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not to say that mothers don't have a role in supporting boys, but men have something different that they have to offer their sons, or if not sons, their grandsons and uncles. And
yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I've seen people come from single parents, whether that be living with their mother or living with their father or grandmother or whatever, and have done exceptionally well. I do think that a positive male role model in young boys' lives and even young girls' lives is an important thing, because I think there's certain things that come from that, just as much as you will get, from my mum's point of view. I think my mum gave me conscience. I would never come to the door and tell my mum I'd got into trouble elsewhere, because I knew what the response would be from my mum, and that kind of stuck with me. From my dad's point of view, he was a driver of education, standards, getting involved in things. So I think each brings something to the party. If either one of those is missing, I think there's an issue. But that doesn't mean that if you're a person that's been in that position, that becomes your life for the rest of it. You can step back from that. I think the important thing, one of my fondest memories of my dad was he used to carry me around the bedroom and sing to me when I couldn't get to sleep. Even now, my oldest boy's 24, and when he comes home from the Navy, I will make him come and just dance with me for a slow dance in the living room, wherever it is, to Luther Vandross, Dance with My Father Again, because that connection is really important. And I think that connection to young boys to their fathers, young boys to their mothers is incredibly important if they can have that. And I'm conscious that actually, having worked with some of those deprived communities, they will say, we are so busy trying to earn a living and keep our head above water. We don't know where our kids are. We don't have time to engage with them. So there have got to families out there that are in that position. Hope for them is that they can see that they can step outside of that and become whatever they want to be, provided they're willing to step forward and put themselves up for it and be willing to fail as well as pass in equal measure.
Yeah, and with that in mind, I'm conscious that in the UK, we've recently had a report out that talks about the number of young people. And if you look closer, the number of young boys that are not in education, employment or training. And that's a challenge, which hopefully we'll resolve with intervention. And then I think about the Knife Angel, and the Knife Angel was an intervention recognizing the challenge, the knife crime and things that lead to knife crime. And I just wonder what it was about having the Knife Angel that made a difference, because I'm thinking whether it's a Knife Angel or something else, it's an intervention that drew young people, I think it's predominantly young people and predominantly young boys, away from a negative path to something positive. And so what was it about it?
So I think that in life and in the example of the Ninth Angel, there are catalyst events or catalyst symbolic things that get to see through all of the chaff and all of the detail to the nub of the problem. Now, me bringing the Knife Angel to Milton Keynes was aimed at some sort of symbolism to get people to say, there's an issue here. How do we come together, put aside any differences? And that's exactly what it did. When I watched the news, I saw a father on there saying, I lost a young boy to knife crime and I'm really glad this is here. That's when you've kind of made the right decision. And actually what that did was that brought the community together in sadness, but they turned that into a really positive thing. There's now a developed community plan around knife crime. There's an education plan. There's places like the Safety Centre that are working on knife crime issues. We've got community leaders that come together. I've attracted some of those community members onto some of my scrutiny and advisory groups to help shape policing. All of that came from that catalyst. What's going on in Hampshire at the minute with the murder? That's a catalytic event. It's an event that's going to bring together discussions that perhaps might not have been happening before. Now, you might agree with some of those discussions, you might not. So one of those discussions will be around knife crime. Another one is around two-tier policing. One is around, do we know where our kids are? One is around social media reporting, and is it right? But actually having those discussions is better than not having them, because through those discussions it will get to some solutions. And I think certainly in relation to that Knife Angel, I've been a fan of the Knife Angel anyway. I was one of the first forces to donate knives that were used in crime to it and welded one of them on. So it was great. And again, when you talk about journey, I welded the first knife on as a chief inspector. I was able to bring it to Milton Keynes at a time when I needed it by calling upon that and saying, look, I really need a favour here. I've got an issue. I need the knife crime angel. That investment in the past was an investment in the future. And that's been my mantra all along the way. I had nothing to gain from donating knives the first time round. I had nothing to gain from welding the knife on. Little did I know that, 5 or 6 years later, I was going to be calling upon them and said, I could really use this now. And they said, yes, okay then. And it gave me that catalyst event, everybody gathering around that, news teams gathering around it to say, we can get together and resolve this. We can help young boys before they get into knife crime, young families. Knife crime isn't unique to boys either. It's, we're seeing young girls stabbing each other and being stabbed. It's able to start those discussions, and from those discussions, it's gone on to some really great things.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. To conclude, and I hope this is my final conclusion, because sometimes something else emerges when in a response. But with that, I hear the importance of dialogue, of conversation about an issue, conversation about a challenge, of the stories and experiences that people have that create greater understanding and empathy. And those are the things that ultimately lead to actions that move us forward. And I think here I am. There's a journey that I've been on that's brought me to a place of speaking to different men about what it means to be a man in today's world. And my ultimate objective is a world in which there is gender harmony, in which men and women are living in perfect harmony with each other. What would you say women could better understand to enable that? And you could say vice versa as well.
Do you mean in general or in relation to the start of the topic that we talked about, young boys?
I'm talking generally men and women of all ages.
Yeah, and sorry, just reframe the question for me, just so I want to make sure I answer it fully.
Yeah, so my ultimate objective vision is, in talking about what it means to a man, is that we have a better understanding of the experiences of men, boys and men generally. And for the sake of men, to be them, to enable men, boys to be their best selves, and for the rest of us, especially women, to better understand men so that we can create a greater harmony. Yeah. So what can we as women best do to be supportive of men and lead towards that?
That's a really interesting one, actually. Yeah, and I can see why you threw it in at the end there. I think in relation to this isn't a problem that men are going to solve about men in isolation. This needs to involve everyone. If you look at some of the things that are causing concern for women nationally, so violence against women and girls is a national concern. I know from our sentiment survey that women feel more vulnerable in the nighttime economy from men in relation to that. So actually having those conversations, the worst thing that could ever happen with any subject that's contentious or that needs a resolution is that we make it so awkward to discuss it that will drive the conversations underground or it isn't said. I think it's really important that we do that. And that's why I was really adamant on the point of it's not just about absent fathers. The mother's role in the bringing up of a child is absolutely key. Making sure that they've got a voice within the conversation is absolutely key in relation to this. I don't think that, men are going to solve boys' issues. It's going to take a whole systems approach, and women have got an active part in that to seek their views. I mean, as it stands at the minute, you've got some of those people out there that are saying, I describe it as alternative opinions, your Andrew Tates of the world and people like that have a particular view in relation to women or men and men's place in society or women's place in society. We are only going to get to the point where people feel like they're educated and have a real good view of what's right or wrong to them if we all stay and take part in the conversation in relation to this. So I think it's incredibly important that women are involved in the discussion because this discussion involves everybody.
And I agree. In fact, that is a key reason why I started having the conversations, because I'd written the book, Male Perspectives on the Value of Women at Work, with a focus on women's experience. And I'd been given talks, running masterclasses and events. And then I found that in those discussions, women specifically, not exclusively, but women started saying, actually, I'm less concerned about my daughter, more concerned about my son. So I don't know whether you have any concluding words for women that are concerned about sons in terms of what they could do, say, be.
Well, I hope if they're listening to this and they feel that any of it resonated with them, that actually they can be the person that pushes that young child in a particular direction. You know, I look at I've got 2 boys, and one boy is probably closer to me in terms of who he comes to for advice and things. My youngest is more likely to go to his mum and have that conversation. So I don't think there's any monopoly on this in terms of dad, mum, parent, male, female. Them understanding, that male perspective, that some of the things that I've laid out can equally be as important. Getting the young people, I've talked to 3 parents whose children are going through GCSEs at the moment. And one of them was like, my kid seems to be on this and they're focused on it. Another one was like, I'm having a really hard time. He's not particularly focused. Another one was like, I found him upstairs with a knife, threatening to harm himself because he felt the pressure. Now that we're coming to the end of it, I've spoken to all 3 of those parents. They're all saying, do you know what? After the chats we had with them, they've got down to it. I've come through it. They seem to have done really well. All different approaches, all different kids, but having conversations with parents or adults or people that can help them and coming through it well. So I don't think there's a one size fits all, but we've got to keep talking about this. I think that the podcasts like this that you're having will bring out different perspectives. And actually, I don't ever, in any of the things I say, expect people to sit there and go, I agree with him on that. I agree. Actually, learn as much from the disagreeing from people. Actually, I disagree with that. I don't want to be like that. I want to be like this, as you do from the people you agree with. I've seen chief constables that have come in and presented, and I've thought, I don't want to be a leader like that. I think they're arrogant, or they're this, or they're that. Or I've seen others where I go, that's brilliant. Or others where I've gone, I can't deliver it like that, even if I wanted to. So you might listen to this and go, that doesn't resonate with me. But what it's done is help me have my thinking where it does resonate with me, that what of the direction I want to go. I think that's a success for this podcast.
Yeah, I agree with you. It reminds me of the person that says, this is all I know because my parents were like that. I think if you're coming from an environment where you see things that are all good and it's what you like, or it's in a certain way, you can emulate that. On the other hand, if you don't like it, you can do something different because you know how it made you feel negative. Really
good example of this is where it's had an effect on me this week. I don't believe that policing is 2-tier in terms of my personal definition of it. When we apply the law, we apply it as fairly as we can, but we do recognize difference, and we do different things for different communities because of the specific needs of that community. But what I have come to realize as part of this debate's gone on nationally and locally is there is a perception out there that policing is 2-tier. And actually, we can't ignore that perception. We have to do something about it. Now, that something might be to absolutely demonstrate that we are not 2-tier and demonstrate why with the evidence to support it. But if you had asked me 2 or 3 months ago, I'd have just said we're not 2-tier, and I could give you all the evidence why. So people looking at this podcast might go, I disagree with him, but now I've formed my own opinion of what I need to do. That's a win. That's an absolute win.
And I think to conclude, the key is let's continue to have the conversations, and the conversations where people talk and they're given space to talk. And on the other side, we listen, and we listen to hear and understand. So I think that's key. Dennis, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation, found it insightful, as I'm sure will others too.
Thank you very much, and thanks for giving me the time to speak today. Bye.
Thank you for joining me for today's conversation. I hope you found it insightful. Get in touch and let me know what you think, or if I or any of my guests can be of support to you. Until next time, this is Susan Popoola, working towards the creation of a Mosaic World.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Leading in the Mosaic World podcast. Do visit our website at www.mosaicworld.live to find out more about what we do and how we can be of support to you. Alternatively, connect with me, Susan Popoola, spelt Popoola, on LinkedIn, and let me know what you think of the podcast. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, give it a first-class rating, and tell everyone you know all about it. Thank you.